We've been talking for a while, and I want to open it up to questions, but one last thing I want to touch on before we do. Do you recall the last edit? It came from you. You called me up one day, you were basically done with the book.
Yes.
And you gave me a very long preamble about why what you were about to say was very important, and you didn't know what I was going to think of it, but you wanted me to listen and hear it, and this went for 2.5 minutes, I swear, and you said, okay, you know the start of the book, and I said, yes, I know the start of the book. You said, I want to just add 2 words to the very, very beginning, to that first sentence, which read, when I began to go on evening walks that fall, you said, I want to open with the words, and so when I began to go on evening walks last fall. And I said, that's perfect. And with that, you were done.
that actually was it. Yeah. You know, I guess I liked it, but I was a bit worried that that you might find it gimmicky or something. But I've always well, there's 2 things that sort of spurred that on. You know, a work that sort of begins in the middle, because since when is the beginning of the book the beginning of the story? You know, it's not. So his life goes on, and so then this other thing, and at the beginning of Beowulf, you know, the first word is "huet," so or lo, if you swing that way, lo, thus, you know, something that's saying, and then, you know. So it's almost a dramatic beginning, but it's also like a feeling of continuation. Mm-hmm. But I very much wanted to also give you that sense of just sort of slipping into. I love this idea of a boat, because we've not talked about that, but that's how I think about it. It's, you just get into the slipstream of the story, right. And hopefully it affects your pulse. That's the hope.
Well, it's definitely affected mine. I think we should see if there's some questions in the audience. The first one's always the hardest, and then the river flows. Thank you.
Hopefully this is pretty easy. I can talk loud. Okay, you mentioned that 4 out of your 5 favorite books were under 200 pages, so I was just kind of curious what those books were.
If they're under 200 pages, if they're over 200 pages, just a little bit over. The Blue Flower by Penelope Fitzgerald, I think is, yeah, it's a masterpiece of reticence and laconic narrative. As is The Beginning of Spring by Penelope Fitzgerald. Conceious Disgrace has been definitely a huge influence. 4 out of 5 is an exaggeration, but you know, I had this experience one summer. I read John Fowles' Daniel Martin, one of his lesser known works, but it's 700 pages. And then I read The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, which is 700 pages of madness, Murakami, which they were fine. and then I read the book of Spanin, which is like a little wisp of a thing. And I thought, you know, I'm at home here. This a tightly edited, intensely intelligent book. There are some long novels I like, but I love the absence of waste that you have in an accomplished short novel that seems to do everything it needs to do with no bagginess. But that's, you know, mileage varies. Harry Mulisch, The Discovery of Heaven, is more than 600 pages, and it's also one of my favorites.
I don't know how to really frame the question. I'd like to hear more of your role, what you did. You know, you read what you thought should happen, what you told him, and so forth. What you did as an editor, and I don't have a real feeling for that yet.
Well, what I do as an editor varies from book to book. It really depends on what each book needs. I like to think, my editor once said to me, I'm here to represent the reader. I'm here to ask you, the author, questions that I believe a reader would want you to ask, and you have an opportunity to address them before it's complete. And so one of my roles with Open City was asking those questions. Part of that was, as we discussed about the character's family, that I felt that the reader wanted to know more about who this man was, and that the pieces that Teju was putting together were pointing toward family, but not entirely, but in part, and I felt that it wasn't in the book. And so I saw this as a whole, and we needed to talk about it. Why wasn't it in this book? Why could it be in the book? What would be too much for the book? So it was asking that kind of question. This was a case where the prose came in beautifully. One of the experiences of reading this book is getting caught up in the flow of this prose, which is this man's voice of memory and longing and loss. And so I didn't have to do too much fussing with language in this case. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends on what's needed. But in this case, not very much, just a little bit here and there, but nothing dramatic. And then the other thing that editors do, and that you can answer if I did this, but I read a quote recently by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who was an editor at Doubleday, first Viking and then Doubleday for a long time, and she said that being an editor is like being a mom. And she meant that you're just there. And your writers know you're there to encourage, to nudge, to support, to listen, but to be there. And it can be an important role. I take it seriously. When I heard that quote, I also sort of had a momentary crisis about my masculinity. I thought, do my writers think of me as a mom? And I asked a couple of them, and they sort of...
I don't know. I find your memory. But maybe that's just me. Well, to answer your question a little bit more, of course, these days we don't send very many things in printout as regular mail until near the end of the process. So it's Word files are traveling back and forth. And if David said, well, I think the reader would need a little bit of something here, and then I would give as little as possible, and then I'd send it to him, and he'll say, that's good, but I think maybe the reader might want a little bit more, and then I would maybe move a comma. At the point where a few editors showed some interest in acquiring this book, and I found myself in the absolutely surreal and absurd situation of having to make a choice. I was sure I wanted to work with David, not because I knew him before, but because based on having met him, I knew that this was somebody I could be in conflict with productively, and I guess I always think about that. If you not just work relationships, but if you get into a relationship with someone, it's not how are you with each other when everything is fine, but how are you going to be in conflict? What are your conflicts going to be like? And in him, from the way he talked about the book and what his ideas were, I could tell that this was somebody I could actually have the kind of discussion I would like to have with if a creative difference came up. So that was a very important decision for me, and I think it was actually vindicated, partly because luckily there weren't many points of difference, very, very few. You know, I probably wrote 270 pages, 280 pages, and over the course of the editing, would probably cut out 10 and added another 10, which is not a lot of change at all. So, but in the things that did come up, we were able to find a common language and just the right amount of pushing and pulling, and then we got it, and then the differences got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then I started to go crazy a little bit, and then he said, "You're done."
I love saying that.
That was a good day. Should have gone with the other editor. Oh my God. It never even remotely got to that point. So, yes.
The other thing that all editors do is once it is done, the editor is the primary champion for the book in the publishing house, and to get the publishing house prepared to publish it, to present the book to publicity department, sales department, marketing department, to send it out to the world, to get people to blurb it, other writers to read it in advance. That's the role that every editor plays, and that's an important part of it as well.
Yeah, and for me it was definitely a great lesson in learning to trust the process. Like I said, I finished the first draft in the late summer of 2009. We finished with the edits by the spring. You're done. I said, great, I'm done. When do I get published? You know. And he said, well, it's too late for summer because there's a there's a lot of things you have to do before publication. And he said, I don't think we should do it in the fall. I said, why not? Why not? Why not? You know? Fall is my second favorite season. Third.